Welcome to the Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. Larry is the author of over 40 books, the founder of Dove International, a worldwide family of churches and ministries in 6 continents, and has over 50 years of leadership experience. He and his guests will share inspirational leadership insights from their journey with God. These insights, gleaned from serving leaders in many nations, will transform your life and leadership. For more information on Larry's books and resources, visit LarryKreider.com.
Larry Kreider here with the Larry Kreider Leadership Podcast. Today I have with me in the studio my friend Doug Lehman. Welcome.
Well, it's good to be here, Larry.
Doug, I've watched you in leadership for a long time, and you've obviously did lots of leadership when you were younger. We're going to talk about that. You lead a local church. I mean, you're bivocational. You run a whole farm, a huge chicken farm. One of the main things I like about you. I was a chicken farmer, and you are still a chicken farmer.
Yes, I am. Yeah.
And then obviously, you work overseas in India and many places. So thanks for joining me today, and we're going to get right down to it. Talk to me about your early years. What did you learn about leadership when you were young, and how did you ever come to Christ? How did that work?
Sure, yeah. Well, I just had the blessing. Well, first of all, thanks, Larry, for the opportunity to be here and just sit in your inner sanctuary and spend this a few minutes with you. But yeah, just a real privilege and an honor, and really hope this time can be beneficial to both of us. But so early on, I grew up. I always tell people I think I went to church probably the Sunday after I was born.
Yeah,
was there ever since. Met the Lord at a Christian youth camp when I was 9 years old.
Got it.
Really, probably more so to get my free ticket out of hell card. Was really my motivation at that point in time. And really then through my teen years, I probably wrestled with my faith some, but it was a good wrestle.
Sure.
Just learning and growing. And then by 27 years old, sort of jumping way ahead, my wife and I were leading a youth group at that time. And I was baptized in the Holy Spirit on a weekend retreat. And my life has never been the same since.
That's beautiful.
And so I began to understand some things that I had really been searching for, really probably since the age of 9.
Sure.
Then and whenever around the age of 27, 28, and God took me on an amazing journey.
Yeah,
and we're still on that journey, so it's been good.
Well, I see you in leadership today in many areas, but let's go back to when you learned leadership when you were young. What are some areas of leadership or some things about leadership that you learned when you were young?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so some of the things, just some leadership roles maybe I had when I was growing up, really early on. Probably one of my first things I did was we had a pretty active youth group at our church. And it was interesting. We didn't have a youth pastor or a youth minister at that time. It was just some amazing couples that volunteered to spend their time with us. And really, by the time I was probably in my mid-high school, sophomore high school, there was a group of us that really sort of took over the leadership of that group. And we led the Bible studies.
You were still in high school?
Yeah, still in high school.
Wow.
And there was a group of us, and I ended up being, I guess I don't know why we called it the president of the youth group, but that's what
why not?
That's the term was used back then. So I was the leader of that group, and we did a lot of activities, and really, we were hungry. There was a hunger in that group, and we really went after things ourselves at that time, and most of that group today is either in church leadership somewhere, and all are following Jesus in some way, shape, or form. So
that all happened when you were a teenager.
Yeah, when I was a teenager. And it's sort of, leadership was one of the things I never looked for, never really wanted.
It found you,
but it just sort of found me, and I guess wouldn't say no. And so I just sort of kept on choosing that route. And then in my class at school, I went to a local Shalom Christian Academy in the Chambersburg area, Christian private school. And I ended up being the president of my class there as well. Once again, not something I campaigned for or wanted. It just happened, and so I sort of got used to leadership just happening to me at a young age.
So God would open the doors, and you would walk through, basically. Yeah.
And what was really interesting, so after high school, I went to college for 2 years. First of all, I was going to be a physical therapist. That changed in one semester, and then I was going to be a youth minister. And you would never know this today, but I got out of that major because I did not want to do the internship. I was afraid to do that. But I mentioned college because in college, I made a conscious decision when I went to college, I'm not going to lead anything. And I stuck to my guns, and I dropped out of college after 2 years. And I look back on that, and I probably wouldn't have if I would have got involved. But like there were things that were crying out to be led, and I just said no.
So why did you do that?
I was so tired of leading.
Okay.
Like I just felt like I just wanted to go somewhere where I wasn't known as a leader. And I missed out on. Looking back, of course, when you're in that, you never realize that.
Right.
But looking back, I really missed out on some opportunities, probably, and probably would have finished college at that point, which I did later in life, but. I probably would have finished back then if I would have just continued to be willing to lead.
Now, we're going to dig into some things you learned about leadership in a few moments, but give us some other areas where you've led.
Yeah, so I was on a lot of sports teams growing up, and often would be like a captain of that team. I've got into coaching pretty early on. Enjoyed leading in from a coaching standpoint. I started a farming business at 20.
Wow.
It sort of fell into my lap too, but I started a farming business basically from scratch, and it went really, really well. We were dairy farmers, and then I got into some custom work, began to plant corn for other people, and so that taught me. I learned a lot of things in that business that, once again, you never realize it when you're in the middle of it, but really began to prepare me for things I was going to deal with even now. I guess when you run your own business like that, you don't really think of yourself as a business leader, but began to just be involved in some farming business leadership areas, agribusiness areas, for a season, credit unions and things like that were looking.
Sure.
Yes.
Now, you and your wife, Jen, have led together. You guys are a great team. How did you meet Jen? How did that happen?
So Jen and I met in high school. We went to the same school together.
Wow.
We rode the bus together from the time she was in first grade until I could drive, which would have been in 11th grade when I was in 11th. So we rode the bus together. She didn't like me very good for several reasons. I usually picked on her a lot. She will tell you. There was one time on the bus where whipped cream ended up getting on her from my doings, and so. But yeah, I fell in love with her. Really, she was let me think here. I guess probably a ninth grader. I was a sophomore.
Okay.
But it wasn't until a year later that we began to go out.
Right.
And so we were sitting I asked her to go to the skating rink with me first. We went roller skating together.
And she said yes.
She said yes, and we held hands and couple skated. It was awesome.
She forgot all about the whipped cream and shaving cream, and you're good.
So she brings it up sometimes. But yeah, no, we met in school, and then we both. I went to college for 2 years. She went into the YES program, which was similar to YWAM.
Yeah.
And she was in Mexico for a year, so we were separated. So we dated for 5 years, but we were separated for probably a year and a half, 2 years of that. Which was really, really beneficial to both of us in that time.
So you guys get married, and then you get involved in youth ministry on the side while you're on the farm, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
What did that look like?
Oh, wow, it looked like crazy. We got married. I was the ripe old age of 21, and she was 20. And the church that we were part of, a great church we were part of, they left us sit for a year. So we did not do really anything ministry-wise for a year. Then they asked us to be volunteer youth leaders at the end of that year, and we agreed, and it was supposed to be a 3-year term. Ended up in the middle of the second year, they named me the youth director of the church, and it was always volunteer, as we were never paid for doing youth ministry, but we sort of acted like we were.
Right.
So we were farming full-time and doing youth ministry full-time. What really then jump-started things for us, several things, but we actually then moved off the farm into our small city. I call it a rurban, like rural and urban together, a rurban community.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, so we lived in what we called a rurban community. It was our church had actually purchased a house that was a drug house.
Sure.
They were going to smash it, and we went to the leadership and make a parking lot out of it. We went to the leadership and say, hey, can we live there? And you would have thought our pastor at that time died and went to heaven, because he never thought anybody would want to actually move into the neighborhood.
Right.
And so we moved into the neighborhood, and so we were present, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, but we were present there. And so kids would come to our door, at our house. And actually, really, the church we ended up planting 5 years later was birthed in the backyard of that property. So
wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, so we moved there, and Jen and I did, you mentioned together, like, Yeah, we've just, most of our ministry, anything that I say here today, I have to give credit to her for, because we learned it together.
Yeah.
It wasn't just me, it was us
You're
together.
a great team. Let's talk about some of the lessons you learned. Again, this is a leadership podcast. We're going to talk about lessons you learned in leadership from those early days, and we'll talk more about the present after that.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the early days, and when I talk about, I sort of group this as the early days from those youth group days, when we were leading, to small business, and to maybe even our first foray into world of youth ministry in a heavier way. But one of the things that I learned early on was that maybe availability is more valued than skill. We were just available.
That's good.
And I think sometimes, especially in our culture today, availability is a premium. Because our time, everybody's asking for our time or competing for our time, maybe is another word. And so, if like you're listening to this and you're wondering why you're not being asked to lead, maybe you're not perceived as simply available. Because we did not have a skill set. We didn't, I went to college, but I just went to college, I learned some great things, but nothing that really helped me in business or in leadership at that point in time. And so I really realized, Jen and I began to realize that, there is really, just value in being available.
Be available.
And you learn then after you say yes to things. So
give us some more. Give us some more things you learned when you were younger.
Yeah. So one of the things I remember from my corn planting days. So I mentioned custom work, custom corn planting.
Sure.
I remember one of those. Or one of the probably first or second year that I planted. I thought I did a great job for this farmer, and he had some critique of my corn planting, which I, of course, didn't agree with. And so it frustrated me. So one day I was with a crop consultant who had really actually helped me get started with the corn planting. And I was sort of maybe complaining to him, grumbling to him a little bit about this farmer, and really wanting him to just, affirm my being right is what I was looking for. And I remember him looking at me and he said, well, he said, always remember, he said, that there's usually a nugget of truth in every criticism you ever receive. And I have went back to that over and over again, because I've been in leadership now for almost 25 years. And as you well know, Larry, criticism comes with the job.
Comes with it.
There's plenty of it. And so it's easy to want to be right in those situations. But I've learned to try not to be offended, especially initially, because that's usually our initial take on it, and then take it as a growth opportunity and learn from it. So that's, one of those early day things. So
that was great advice. It's so true. There's always this little nugget of truth. Yeah. And that, if we can use that to see our leadership increase and improve, makes all the difference in the world. What else did you learn in those early days?
Early days. Leader, know thyself. Sounds like King James.
Yeah, really.
Leader, know thyself. But I learned, and I would say this is something Jen and I learned together, that people tend to love you as a leader for what you do, not for who you are. And so if you don't do well, or if it's not perceived you're doing well, all of a sudden you get pushed to the back burner.
Right.
And so you really have to know yourself, your identity, because and one of the things, traps you tend to fall into then, or that I saw in myself when I began to really feel like the only way I could get affirmation or be loved was for what I did, was it led to burnout, because I would strive to do more to make people happy. So it led to burnout, led to self-hatred. I get to the point where I just didn't like myself. And I'm like, this is who I am, but yet I had to keep the facade up almost, or and so it led to that, and then it can lead ultimately to isolation and depression even, as far as that goes. So so it's just really important you know who you are as a leader, and that identity, and this is your identity in Christ first and foremost, as a son, and Jen as a daughter first and foremost. We have to know that, because and then recognize that your value don't come from what you do. It's it comes from who you are.
So true, so good.
And so,
Jesus said it well when he said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." So how can you love your neighbor if you're not loving yourself?
Absolutely. And that's probably one of those taglines at the end of that verse we often don't think about.
Right.
But, and I've heard preached many times, love yourself so you can love your neighbor well.
Exactly. So, I'm sure there's more things you learned in those early days.
Oh, there's lots of things.
Give us a couple more, and then we'll get into some mistakes.
One of the things I learned from my I guess it would be my second pastor, actually, but don't defend the indefensible.
What does that mean?
So there are times when you get, as a leader, where you get attacked or there's accusations made against you that are not true or they're unfounded. And now I'm not saying that you never put up a defense of, especially if it's something that's really a big deal. Maybe you have to, but there's many things that you just, when you begin to try to defend yourself, that all of a sudden it begins to sound like maybe you were guilty, or maybe you did do what you're accused of, and things like that. And so what it often happens, I find about defending oneself from these kinds of attacks usually only deepens the exasperation, and it builds a wall between the people that you're trying to lead, or maybe even the person you're sitting across from.
Sure.
And often, at least in my experience, often those attacks that come on leadership come from a place of not in me, but in the person I'm maybe being attacked by, of disappointments, unmet expectations. I think you had a podcast on that not too long ago.
I did.
And wounding. And so they're usually coming out of this place of hurt. And so recognizing that first, and then recognizing and this just happened to me literally a week ago, where somebody accused me of, it really wasn't really an accusation, but they made maybe a critique, pretty harsh critique, we'll just call it that. And my immediate, all of a sudden my antennas all went up and I was ready to
You're still
just
learning,
go at it. And in about 30 seconds to a minute, no, I just need to sit here and listen and not defend myself, because there really wasn't anything to defend.
Right.
I only would have made it worse and it wouldn't have helped the situation. So recognizing there are things that it's just not worth defending. It's just it's just allowing people to talk, and then sometimes. So that
God always vindicates us. I found that over many years. God will always vindicate if we choose the right path, and we speak grace and we bless. He always vindicates.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that I learned when I was in the learning process when I was young. I wish I would have probably paid more attention to it sooner.
Yeah.
So some of these things I learned in my teens and 20s, but I really didn't learn them until I was in my 40s.
Right.
That's honestly, I didn't take the lessons until I was in my 40s. But
sometimes we got to learn again and again and again. You fail the test, you take it again until you get it.
Yeah, and sometimes I took a test a lot of times. I have to say that. So yeah.
Anything else that you learned in those early days?
Yeah, just early days. One of the things I learned from going to Red Lobster.
Red Lobster. I like that restaurant.
It's a great restaurant. There's an advertisement for it, but good. My son actually worked there when he was in high school. My one son did, and so we learned to, the biscuits. Everybody goes there for the biscuits, right?
So what is the Red Lobster lesson?
The Red Lobster lesson. One of the things I noticed about Red Lobster, and I'm guessing it was more than just our Red Lobster in Chambersburg, but Red Lobster would, every few years, would totally redesign everything. Like they would change the decor, the walls would get painted, different decorations on the wall, menus, pretty much menu, but the menus looked different. Uniforms would change on the staff, tablecloths, everything would change, booth would change, seating arrangements would change. They would do this, and I think that one of the things I was like, places that don't stay fresh, and I'm just talking about businesses here, but I think it even applies in church world as well. If you don't stay fresh, people tend to, especially in our 21st century, get bored or tend to get into routines that aren't good. And so I just think there's something that's powerful about regular, designed, intentional repackaging. Same stuff, same food, same thing, but I think I always pay attention to that. And as I was thinking about just sharing that on the podcast, I wrote down here, intimacy inspires creativity and originality. So when we're intimate with the Father, I think, and He's very creative, obviously, and so that creativity and that originality part of us gets spurred on. And so I feel like I would see this in leaders, and it would annoy me. And now I've been leading for a while, so I got to be careful I don't fall in the same trap. But after a while, it's like their message just would lose its freshness. It sounded like even though they said maybe something different, it sounded the same. And there was just and maybe I don't want to judge. I'm not here to judge somebody's level of intimacy with the Father, but I just feel like if we're going to continually as leaders, and I'm not just talking about messages, or sermons. I'm not just talking about maybe mentoring we do, things like that. But I'm talking about sort of the whole, as leaders, I think we need this continual creative side of us and originality coming out. And in our own strength and giftings and powers, that can happen on our own strength.
Right.
And so it's in that place of intimacy where that happens. And so that's something I just noticed about Red Lobster a long time ago.
So good. I never heard that before.
Yeah.
That's the Red Lobster Secret.
Red Lobster Secret. So they still change. They still change. So
Give me one more. Just give me one more.
Yeah, one more. And I was thinking about this actually on the drive down this morning. And there's a saying that familiarity breeds contempt.
Yeah,
and we've heard that in leadership classes, lessons. And I thought, I'm going to tweak that a little bit. Familiarity will breed contempt. There is no doubt in my mind it will breed contempt. But the question is, what are you going to do with the contempt that it breeds?
Explain how that fleshes out. What's that look like?
So I'll just tell you a personal story. So when I was in my late 20s, I was very idealistic. I was very arrogant, full of pride. I thought I knew I thought I was right about everything. And I began to be out. At that point, I was very close with my pastor. And somewhere in that whole 2 or 3 year period, I was close with him. And then he made a decision or so that I didn't quite agree with. And then because of my closeness with him, all of a sudden I began to see all his flaws. Like no longer was he this man, this person on a pedestal that was sowing into my life. All of a sudden, I saw all the things he did wrong. And I began to feel contempt in my spirit, right? And so that happened. And then he actually ended up moving on from that church before I did. He was put in a position actually as our conference leader, which was a good move for him. But so life travels on. Several years later, I get involved in the Dove Network, the Dove family, right? And just loved, Jen and I have loved so much what we've learned and we've grown. And probably 3 or 4 years, 5 years into our experience there, but we began to get familiar with yourself and other leaders. And, and it was, when we first went to the school, it was like, oh my goodness. And then all of a sudden, you guys loved us so much and come alongside of us. And then that whole familiar thing started to happen where all of a sudden, and I guess I'm allowed to say this on a podcast, we saw a few flaws, along
There's a lot of flaws.
And I remember waking up one day and I had that same thing in my spirit that I had toward that former leader.
Interesting.
And the Holy Spirit says, Doug, what are you going to do this time?
Wow.
Are you going to go down that same road?
Yeah.
Now, here I am 10, 15 years later, and we're still in relationship, and so I feel like it's a lesson I learned.
Sure.
I've learned how to communicate, maybe, to talk about things, to address things that, and just to love people for who they are and leaders for who they are and recognize that I'm not perfect.
Right.
And some of that was just the whole God's chisel of taking off all the arrogance and junk out of my life too. But I remember a moment where the Holy Spirit said, Doug, are you going to go down the same road again?
Right.
And I had to make a decision. And I said, no, I'm not going to go down that road again. I'm going to choose.
So good.
I'm going to choose not to allow contempt and resentment to fill my spirit. And and it's been so good. It's been so good. I'm glad I learned that lesson. And I didn't have to take that test again because wow, I wouldn't want to take that one again. So
the only perfect leader is Jesus. We're all trying to be like him and growing in intimacy with him. And great example. Now, you already mentioned a few mistakes you've made. Did you make any more?
Well, yeah, we've made we've made plenty.
Have you listed them?
So I've listed a few.
Okay.
I think one of the things, and this sort of maybe touches on just what we talked about with the familiarity breeds contempt thing. Maybe another way to say that would be familiarity breeds dishonor, can breed dishonor. And one of the mistakes I made was dishonoring those in leadership whom I disagreed with.
Yeah.
And that seems to be pretty much what we're taught to do in our culture today. From, even it breaks my heart when I hear whether it don't matter who's president for the last, honestly, since the 90s when I started paying attention to things, there was always a group of people who were very dishonoring loudly to our national leaders. Right. And still is that way. And so one of the mistakes I made was dishonoring that leadership. And I wrote down here, the kingdom will expand at the pace of honor.
That's good. Say that again. That's really good.
The kingdom will expand at the pace of honor.
That's really good.
So in your sphere of influence, whether it's a local church, whether it's a network, denomination, business, the growth can only occur at the pace that honor is present.
That's beautiful.
And so, but I made a mistake of,
Yeah.
and so I'm trying to, and you mentioned India before.
Yeah.
And India, I've seen that so happen, and we can just maybe, in India, and some of it's cultural,
right?
But our brothers and sisters in India, and you and I have been there together.
Sure.
They have learned how to honor.
They have.
In ways maybe that we need to learn from them, and so there is an honor that happens there, and the growth of the Dove family in India even maybe speaks to that a little bit, as they've honored well, and just the expansion we've seen there in the past 3 or 4 years has been incredible.
Yeah.
And so I think that keeping pace thing, it just opens up lots of doors. So
yeah, if we can establish a culture of honor in every setting we're in, whether it's in business or whether it's in church or whether it's in a ministry or whatever, culture of honor is so important. And the Bible's clear: give honor to whom honor is due.
Yeah.
And so I really, really, really affirm that.
And maybe another area would be marriage.
Yeah,
how we honor our spouses.
Exactly.
As leaders, how we honor, whether a husband or wife, how we honor our spouses is so crucial.
Yeah, and our families.
Yeah,
and our families,
yeah.
our children, our parents.
Sometimes we forget
that's
those
right.
closest to us and how we need to honor there as well.
Yeah, very, very, very good. Other mistakes you made? Did you make any more?
Yeah, I was hoping we couldn't spend a lot of time on this. No. But yeah, just a few more. But yeah, one of the things I did, and really probably maybe still can allow this to sneak in sometimes, is abdicating leadership to others at crucial moments. One of the things that I've struggled with over the years is feeling a spirit of rejection, and that's probably a whole nother podcast. But I struggle with, and one of the things in me that I don't want somebody to say no to me, or I don't want somebody to maybe leave my ministry or things like that. And so there are times where there's crucial moments where instead of stepping up to the plate, so to speak, and taking that 2 out, 3 strike, or 2 strike, 2 out pitch, and swinging the bat at it, I will step back and allow somebody else. And the beautiful thing is, it looks like delegation. It oh, Doug is so wonderful, but I've realized that it's actually a failure to lead. And so it's something I'm trying to grow in, but abdicating and almost unhealthily giving my mantle of authority to others. Yeah. And they've not even necessarily misused it. Right. Or since they don't do it, but it's just like an area where I'm supposed to be leading the charge, so to speak, stepping back out of fear. That's one of the reasons I would step back out of fear. And so that would be a mistake that I have made. And it's caused heartache and it's caused maybe sometimes our ministry even to not grow because proper leadership was not in place. And so that whole abdicating thing was
abdication big. Sometimes it can look like delegation, but if the abdication is with the wrong spirit, and comes with that spirit of rejection. So it's so good, so true. Yeah. Other mistakes?
Failure to confront red flags. Jen and I planted a church. We were in our early 30s, and we started really from scratch. It was the two of us. As one local pastor told me, we would have elder team meetings in bed, and that's sort of how it started. And so, so when we started to gather people around us, vision and things like that. You don't want to lose anybody because you're small, right? You're afraid to lose anybody. You don't want anybody to leave because, if 2 people leave, there goes 10% of your whole. Right. And so you don't want that. So often that would cause me to not confront, I wrote down red flags, which what I mean by that is more attitudes, maybe worldviews I saw that were unhealthy, or ideas that people would have that were not scriptural, things like that. Right. And so I would sort of choose to let things ride instead of confronting them and hope they would just get better on their own. Sure. And so, they never do. And usually people would end up leaving anyway. And so it could be really challenging. But just that, so that was a mistake. Probably along with that, this was a big one. And growing up with my background, I blame that, but I really can't because I've learned. But I call it passive aggressive communication. Yeah. And
so what's that look like?
Oh boy. What's that look like? So, and I've had to work on this in my marriage. I've had to work on this with my kids, with my elder team, with those I lead. But I will hint at things I want done or something I want and hope that you pick up on it. Right. I don't want to ask you because once again, I don't want you to tell me no. Uh-huh. And so I'll just say, Larry, hey, there's this real nice, group of people down the street that, did you ever think about, connecting with them? But I would never straight out just say, hey, I really would like you to go to this meeting or the Chamber of Commerce meeting or, whatever it would be. I would just, I would do that. And so it usually it does always end in frustration because the thing I want to get done don't get done. At least the person don't do it. I end up doing it, causing me more work. And then I get frustrated.
Right.
And where simply if I would have said, hey, would you do this? They could have said yes or no, and then I could have moved on. And so that whole, probably growing up how I grew up and even the lack of wanting to confront things, that whole passive-aggressive thing is a biggie.
But you grew up in an Anabaptist background, I did also. And that's kind of part and parcel with the Anabaptist background. And all of us, of course, have had to learn throughout the years how to not fall into that trap ourselves.
Yeah, and so that's a mistake I've made. And honestly, I have to. That's a daily. I still have to lay that defeat of Jesus because I can fall into that pretty quickly.
Give me one more.
Yeah, one more. So another mistake I made was shifting. I called it shifting vision. Just changing up things a lot. God gives you a vision, and so you go after it. And I'd go after it for about 3 months, and then it wouldn't work, or I perceived it wasn't working.
Right.
And so then I would switch to another vision. Oh, well, God said this now.
Right.
And people never were. It's like I was just taking the people I was leading and almost ripping them from one thing to another. Right. And I began.
Like Whiplash.
Like Whiplash. And whenever if you're with a group of people and there's Whiplash, somebody's going to fly off the end, right?
Exactly.
And that happened, and that would happen. And so several years ago, I began coaching junior high girls basketball, and that's a whole experience in itself. But I've learned so much. And I remember one of the first, it was my first year of coaching, I thought I'd come up with this great offensive system that we were going to run, right? And I remember we ran the system, it was the first game, and we played a team that was better than us, and it just didn't work. The system didn't work in that game. And I was like, well, I'm going to change this whole thing up. This isn't going to work. I remember thinking to myself, and I talked to a dad. It wasn't a dad of one of my players, but another dad who was there after the game, and I began, I think this is a great idea, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's not for us. Maybe the girls can't learn it, things like that. And he just said, he said, I wouldn't be so fast about that. He said, choose a system. And he said, that's not a bad one. He said, and just stick with it. And now here we are 4 years later in that story, and we've stuck with a system, and it's paid huge dividends. And has worked really well. And so I've taken that into my leadership, where just sticking with things for longer periods of time before giving them the axe, And so early on in my leadership, I would just shift a lot, and that wasn't healthy for the church, and it would cause. I think your illustration of Whiplash is great, because I'm expecting it, but everybody behind me, my wife's right behind me, right? She feels it, but not that much. Then the next person behind, and the further out it goes, the more the back of the tail, so to speak, gets whiplashed. And so then they're the ones that end up flying off, and then your group stays small.
Exactly.
And so,
I've asked this question again and again as I've trained leaders throughout the world. I'll say this: I say, how many of you like change? And all these leaders say, I love change. And then I ask the question a second way. I say, how many of you like change when somebody else makes the change and you're stuck with their change? And nobody, almost no one. Well, and that's what happens with leaders. We're so used to making decisions, and people are experiencing whiplash, we don't even know it. You see, and that's why it's really important for us to understand that concept you're talking about. It's so good.
Is there any, I know you're interviewing me here, but is there any, like in the early days of Dove when you guys were trying to figure things out?
Oh my! I went to Korea to learn from the Koreans and how they did small groups and cell groups, and they had this deal that if they didn't multiply their small groups in 6 months, that they would have to go to Pearl Mountain. It's like going to purgatory, And so we came back and said, well, if they can do it in Korea, we can do it here. And man, it was whiplash. It was just crazy. And our people were so gracious, in those days. But I made that mistake so many times. You learn over the years. You learn how not to do it in many cases. Doug, you've got so much in you. Would you be willing to come back for another podcast?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, here's why. You got so much on teamwork. I want to talk to you about Overflow, the church you lead. I want to talk to you about how did you, as a pastor and a business leader, how you do that together. That whole bivocational thing. A lot of people struggle with. How in the world do we do that? So I'd like to have you back. Now, Did you have a website that you could give us? Anybody wants to get a hold of you, or like for Overflow, your church, or anything?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, our church website is Overflow CC for Overflow Community Church. .org.
Okay,
and we'll you can find us there. You can email me from there.
Okay.
You can find me on Facebook under Doug Lehman.
Great.
Private message me there. It's fine as well.
Great. Okay, we will get all that on the show notes. So anybody listening, you say, I like this guy. He's got so much that I can learn from. Give you a chance to connect, with Doug and with you, Doug.
Sure.
And that'd be fantastic. So we'll have you back. We'll talk more about all these things we're talking about right now, especially the whole thing about team building and how do you build teams and how does that work? I know you learned so much about that.
Yep.
I just want you to know it's been a joy to walk with you for so many years, and you're always a great inspiration to me.
Well,
so thank you.
Thank you, Larry. It's been an honor to be on the podcast and just be a blessing. And just to love to see how we continue to walk together to see the kingdom of God expand around the world.
Exactly. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll look forward to seeing you again and connecting with you again very, very soon. Blessings to all.
Thank you for listening to Larry Kreider's Leadership Podcast. If you want more information about any of Larry's books, daily devotionals, small group resources, or any other teachings, go to larrykreider.com.